So it's really unusual to be sitting around in my living room, with a couple of 20 somethings, and
What
I'm,
a proud dad moment. Like, right?
yes, it was. It's like, I think my wife was just flabbergasted that they wanted to talk about, of all things, leadership, and to pick my brain a little bit. And so, that was, a tremendous opportunity for me.
Lee and I first met about, I think, 10 or 12 years ago through AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. When Lee and I first met, we were both in the Committee for Human Resources with AASHTO. We learned a whole lot from Lee and his team about strategic workforce planning and how to create a plan and how to implement it. Lee, tell us what you can about leading and the rules that'll really help us, especially in the transportation world.
Over the course of the last 36 years, I've just developed a number of insights and thoughts, rules, things that I kind of coined into rules. None of them I would say are my own. They're things that I've experienced, but they're things to me that when you're a leader, it makes sense. And I kind of capped it all off with a couple of years ago. I was talking around the holidays. One of my sons was home, and his cousin were here. And, they're in their mid 20s, and of all things, they genuinely wanted to talk to me about leadership, and what was important from a leadership standpoint. And so it's really unusual to be sitting around in my living room, with a couple of 20 somethings, and
What a
I'm,
proud dad moment. Like, right?
yes, it was. It was like, I think my wife was just flabbergasted that they wanted to talk about, of all things, leadership, and to pick my brain a little bit. And so, that was, a tremendous opportunity for me, to be able to do that. So from that, I then had an opportunity. One of the divisions within the department had a leadership conference, and they asked me to speak on leadership. Obviously, this isn't a hard and fast list, but it's sort of my thoughts on what I think a leader needs to consider. So the first two are, I think, obviously the most critical to me. One is know your North Star and follow it. And I think every leader has a moral compass. It's what drives you. It's what every decision you make goes back to that moral compass, to that North Star. For me, it's my faith, and my faith. I'm very well grounded in my faith, and when I was making decisions at the department, that faith is what I was drawn to in making my decisions. That was mine. Everybody has their own, and I think simply important thing is that you find that, that, and you let that guide you as you through your journey as a leader. The second thought I have, it was one of our core values at the Iowa Department of Transportation, but it's been a core value of mine for forever, and that is integrity without exception. You always want to do the right thing, regardless of how hard it may be. And I think, integrity is foundational to good leadership. People respect you if they know, that you're going to be consistent in your application. It gives you credibility. I mean, I like to call it street cred. You get street cred for having integrity and for following that integrity. It was kind of interesting that when we had a training exercise, before I had retired, the director we had to describe each other, and the director described to me as the Jiminy cricket of the department. And I wasn't quite sure how to take that, but it you know it was important that to me, integrity, as I've talked about, is extremely important. And so, I think as you work through the organization, that's that's where it's at. It aligns with your values. It aligns with the values of the organization. Um, Years ago, when I was a labor relations specialist with the State Department of Personnel in Iowa, um, I had a situation where I was handling a grievance, and in that grievance, um, the department was wrong, the agency that I was, and my director asked me to issue an answer that was favorable to the department. And, um, you know, I firmly believe in that God looks out for you. And I then had an opportunity almost simultaneously to come to work for the Department of Transportation. Um, so I left the Department of Personnel because of, I often tell folks that it doesn't happen that often, but sometimes your integrity, um, you got to draw the line. And that was a place where I drew the line. So my third rule is humility goes a long way. Um, Listen to others, seek out their help, um, seek feedback from others. You don't always have all the answers. Um, and say you don't know when you don't know, and allow yourself to be vulnerable. As a leader, I mean, that letting people see you as vulnerable, that you don't have all the answers, I think is extremely important. Um, and so I think that's, I would say and that's a tough one sometimes, um, because you often,
It builds trust though, right?
yes, it
Like
does.
it really, I feel like that whole not performing and performing that you know, like you know everything, that's what builds trust with your people.
Mhm. Uh, I think it's very important.
Well, and I think humility takes a lot of courage.
Yes, it really does. Um, you know, from a personal standpoint, the same son, ironically, that asked me about leadership, when he was 9, he had uh, this medical condition where he had these blood vessels in his brain that weren't supposed to be there, and he ended up in the hospital up at Mayo Clinic for 36 days. We didn't know what was going to happen, whether he was going to, actually live or whether he would die. And we had obviously 3 other kids at home. You really had to learn to, we're typically used to doing things for ourselves and not having to rely on others. We had to rely on the good grace of so many people, um, that, and we had and it was probably the first time in my life where I really had to practice that humility from a personal standpoint, and that was a hard thing to do.
Mm.
Um, one of my, I was joking with my wife about my next rule, um, which is life's not fair. Learn it early and get over it. Um,
Like that one.
I do
yeah,
too.
I was away from home traveling for work, and got a phone call from my wife. Our car, and she sent me a picture, and it was of our car sitting down in a ravine, on its top. And I'm like, okay. And so she explained to me that 2 of my sons were with a friend of theirs and needed to come back to our house to pick up something. They allowed the friend to drive our car. He took a corner a little too fast and ended up, through a series of things, rolling the car, totaling the car. And um, my 2 sons, we punished our children, for their activity and what they did wrong, and talked to them about it. But their friend, was didn't get punished and was seen within a week. He was driving his own car around town, and his parents didn't discipline him in any way. And I didn't think that was fair, that they should get punished and he didn't. And I just had to explain to him, look, I said, we have rules and our actions have consequences, and that's the way this family rolls. I said, I can't help it if another family doesn't do that, and that's, they have to decide what works best for them. And so, um, so that's, I guess, another, just a thought on, it's like, hey, sometimes things aren't always fair. They don't work out like you think they should, but that's just sort of the way it is. So
Pretty much always not fair.
yeah, pretty much, pretty much. From that standpoint, the next rule that I often like to talk about is sometimes the road less traveled is the right road to take. I had a situation, where I had a senior leader, uh, that had committed some infractions, and I had to, from a personal standpoint, I had to share that information with uh, folks higher than our agency, and um, that was a tough thing but it's what I had to do because this is one of those things that ties back to knowing your North Star and your integrity without exception, right? I mean, you got it. I felt like I had no choice but to do the right thing, and it ultimately cost that employee their job. And so where I felt tremendously bad about that, I knew it's what I had to do, and sometimes that's a really difficult thing to do, but I think it's important that people understand that. Obviously, the best thing, the more you communicate with folks about why you're doing what you're doing and helping them to understand what you're doing, I think is advisable because the worst thing you can do is obviously make a decision. It's like, well, it was the right decision, so I made it. Just live with it. I think it's important to try to help people to understand, to the extent you can, what you did, why you did it, and where you're headed organizationally. And I think that's something that is important. I would say it's probably the biggest thing from my perspective.
That makes sense. Using the why, leading with why, right?
Every organization has or should have their core values, and I think sometimes it's really difficult if those core values have a meaning and a purpose, then you have to bring those core values into your organization on a daily basis. And tying your decisions to those core values helps people to understand that those core values have meaning. They're not just there because it's kind of the thing everybody does. It's something that we believe in. Just as an aside, at the Iowa DOT, our core values, for the first time in I think organization that I've ever been involved with, that they became an integral part of the organization. Our performance evaluation was tied to the core values. Each one of the core values, you were evaluated on each one of those core values, and that was the majority of the evaluation. We used it in our hiring. We required managers to use questions related to the core values in their in their interviews, and with the understanding that the reason we're doing this is that more often than not, when we let an employee go, especially in the probationary period, it's not because of their technical skills, it's because of their soft skills or their human skills. They don't communicate well, they don't work well with others, take your pick, but all things that have tied back to our core values. So we tried to really introduce those core values into the organization. So I think maybe a long answer to your question is that helping people to understand that decision and how that decision is tied to your core values and the importance of those core values, I think it also helps.
Well, and I think, to build on that a little bit more, in this day and age where things are really unpredictable and things are constantly shifting and changing, we've got the rapid technology, we've got really different expectations from our investors and from the traveling public and of ourselves. Um, I think that when you can be consistent as a leader in the way you make decisions or how you tie everything back to core values, that may be the only constant that people have to rely on in the workplace, right? They don't I remember when I first started working, we knew, oh, December is the month where you get everything cleaned up from the previous year and you get ready for the next year because you have a little bit of time to breathe. And that just doesn't exist anymore. You don't have that type of ability to map out a year in advance with a certain level of certainty, I think.
Mhm. I think you're absolutely right. That consistency, especially today in a world that's not consistent, um, and it's important that your employees be able to see that and understand that when they make a decision, that they're going to make a decision based on where they think you would be at and what you have done. And so, yeah, if you're not consistent in your actions, it's going to be difficult for your staff to be able to make decisions. I think one of the other rules, that is a learning organization is a growing organization. It's important that you keep building on your knowledge. You keep building that knowledge base. I remember the first time I attended, when I attended the ASHTO 2-week leadership training. back in Indiana. And I hadn't been to a leadership training for quite some time, and I'd been working at that time for probably 20 years or so. It really, and somebody asked me about, well, why are you going to that? And I said, what's important is everybody has to sharpen that pencil once in a while. And it's important that you keep building on, there are always new thoughts, new ideas. You need to stay current, and you need to constantly, because otherwise the organization stops to moving, it stops growing. And so it's important. One of the things we did at the department was, we allotted, in addition to all the required training that we provided, we allotted 10 hours of training every year that each employee, when they did their performance evaluation, also attached a training plan for how they were going to utilize those 10 hours during the course of their next evaluation period. Because we wanted employees to understand it's important that you pick a topic, and it was completely up to them as to how they wanted to handle that 10 hours. They could go learn about something that had nothing to do with their job.
I 100% agree with the learning organization and the value of it. But my question is, level with you, how can you, I struggle with, I want to learn everything all the time. And then I spread myself really thin with learning all of these new things and get really exhausted. And so
Mhm.
how do you balance when your organization promotes learning, you believe in learning, and continuing to stretch your mind and things like that? But then how do you balance that with not getting exhausted?
It is tough. One of the things I used to always talk to my staff about was, as we talked about training, we also talked about their career and where they were going, and where they saw themselves and what they wanted to accomplish. And so, it's like I talk about, they can do whatever kind of training they want, but for my staff, I always tried to talk to them about what's that next door that you want to walk through, and ultimately, where do you want it to land? And it's like, then take a look at what training opportunities are out there to help you build on that, and to get you ultimately to where you want to go. Understand where you're going and where you want to, from a career standpoint, and then develop your training plan around that.
But I think one of the challenges is, so we hear about leadership as a life skill, communications as a life skill. It's something you learn throughout your life. I think learning is a life skill. And I wonder what it would be like if organizations, when you first came into an organization, they taught you how to learn if you didn't already know. Like, I just wonder what the world would be like if we had a little stronger focus on what it means to be learning throughout your life, and what you do with that learning and how you apply it.
Very critical. I think that would be a tremendously wonderful thing to be teaching, um, as and when you do your new employee orientation. Part of that orientation is the value of learning and the importance of learning, and this is how, here are the myriad of ways you can learn and the opportunities that you have. Sure.
Having a daughter in college now, right? They have
Mhm.
a class for freshmen now that basically does that. It teaches them how to learn and how to use the resources of the school. And it's like a learning how to learn half a credit hour class that they have to take in their freshman year. And so, yeah, for anybody that listens to this podcast, I think it would be really great if we did something like that for DOTs. With orientation or onboarding, learning how to learn for adults.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Huge thing.
You could start a new trend, Lee, just through this podcast. We never know.
Yeah, there you go. And then, another rule that I've always found important, and it's one that, Paul Trombino, who's the past AASHTO president and was Iowa DOT director, we've all been in those situations where, yeah, it'd be easier if we did this, but it's like the right thing to do is to take that step out there. And I think it's not just doing the right thing, it's having a mindset where I'm going to keep pushing the envelope a little bit. I'm going to be willing to take risks. Now, I'm one of those people that, um, I was, and I always called it, he called it being risk advantageous. Um, I always wanted to temper that risk a little bit. It's like, I wanted to me, taking that measured risk is important. But you don't want to just start doing things and taking risk for the sake of taking risk. But it's important to understand the circumstances that you're in and to evaluate it, and then to take it. You might be doing something that's a little bit risky, but that's okay. That's how you move the organization forward. No organization moves forward. They just stand still if you're not willing to take risk.
I think making sure that your people feel like they can be, take measured risks and feel safe and they can trust you that they are able to do that and it doesn't put them at risk. Like that to me is a key point of risk. I have worked with supervisors where I felt like if I took a risk and failed, that would be my job. And then I've worked with supervisors where I thought if I took a risk and failed, say, okay, well, I'm proud of you for trying, if that worked, that would have been cool. So.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, 100% agree. And I think that's one of the things of taking that measured risk, not only from a leadership standpoint. It's like your staff have to know that it's okay for them to do that you've got their back. You don't want them to get crazy, but you want them to be willing to take that a little bit of risk, trust their gut. That every leader's got that gut thing, right? That, I mean, in your mind, this is the right thing to do. You got to trust that gut. And it's like your staff have to feel the same way. And I think in today's environment, um, where things, over the years before I left, things have, we were never really a political organization. Well, transportation is always one of those agencies that always had the benefit of not necessarily being as political, but that changed. That has changed tremendously and I would hazard a guess there isn't a DOT out there that wouldn't tell you that they have a much different environment. Their governor's offices are more involved every day in the decisions that an agency makes. And so being able to take that risk today is much different than it was 10, 15 years ago. One of the other thoughts, and I want to make sure I get this right, learn to dance in the rain. Life is not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. We all face adversity. And you can't ignore it and hope that it'll go away. You got to figure out how to work with it, and how to get through it. I think that's how you grow as a leader. When I think about my son, and I talked about his illness that we had to deal with, we had to learn as parents. I mean, we could, because we had a parenting style. Every parent does, right? And I think you all, you're both parents, and you know what you have that style as a parent. Well, because of his brain injury, we had to learn how to parent differently with him. Our choice was to try to not change how we parent, and but because of what had happened to him, he reacted to things much differently, and it was just a different environment. So our choice was either to continue to struggle through, or try to figure out how to make it work, and raise him. Lord knows, I'm sure through all of it, we made a lot of mistakes. And the same thing happens in the workplace, right? I mean, we all, you can count on, both hands how many times everything works as smoothly as you would like them to. Sometimes, and so you got to figure out how to work through that adversity. Sometimes you get adverse decisions back, and if you terminate an employee and you get an adverse decision, and you have to bring them back. Now you got to be able to help that manager understand why this employee is coming back, and so it wasn't necessarily that they did the wrong thing.
I think, yeah, I can see multiple layers to this, like an onion, where that same concept of parenting your children differently for how they need to be parented for whatever their situation is would be the same as leading your people differently for how they need to be leaded. Maybe one of them likes to be, given more information and more, not micromanaged, but that they want more from you, and another one wants to be left alone and kind of given a general guide and then let them go free. And so very similar there as well. And I love the quote, because like, don't pretend it's not raining. You know,
Yeah. Right.
you accept that it's raining, and then figure out, okay, it is raining. Now, how are we going to move forward and make the best of this rain? Right.
Mhm. Exactly. Um, there's always going to be that that situation where things happen, and you just got to figure out how to work through it. And I think being there for your staff and helping your staff to work through those difficult situations.
It's raining for them, even when it's not raining for you.
Right. Yeah, and understanding that, and but that's also important. I think that's staying in touch with your staff and understanding that to what you just said. Um, in your world, it's a beautiful sunny day, but it's pouring in theirs, and so if you come at them, tell them with something else that you need done, and you don't accept the fact that it's pouring down rain in their world, um, you need to you need to be empathetic to that and to understand and help them kind of work through that as well. Next rule is I'm a huge NCIS fan, and Leroy Gibbs had all these rules, and his rule 51 was sometimes you're wrong, and I think that ties into so many of the other things that we talked about. It's acknowledging when you're wrong, and that you made a mistake. Um, Nobody expects or should expect a leader to be perfect in their, you're not gonna hit hit the ball out of the park 100% of the time, right? I mean, sometimes you're gonna hit a pop fly, and that's okay. Sometimes you're wrong, and acknowledging you're wrong. Um, I think that goes a long ways with your staff and with your employees to help them have greater respect for you. That you also make mistakes, and um, Lord knows over my 36 years, I made my share of mistakes. And I was okay with letting folks know that okay, we didn't get it right this time. But what do we, and it was always the thing that, I told staff when they would come to me with a situation where they screwed up, they made a mistake. And it's like, and so, and I learned this from one of my previous managers who, after he got done chewing me out, um, it's like, it didn't feel like I was being chewed out, right? He talked me through what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what are we going to do going forward to make sure it doesn't happen. And that's all I think that as leaders we can expect from our employees is what went wrong, do you know why it went wrong, and what are we going to do going forward so that we can avoid this happening again. If we're able to do that, then we've learned from our mistakes and we keep moving forward. And I think that's equally as true for us as leaders, that that we don't get it right all the time. Um, I always joke. I tend to go back to a lot of my family stories, but I mean, when my oldest daughter was little, um, my wife and I had a rule that it's like if our child had a fever or if they were, um, had, we're be honest, blunt about it. If they were throwing up, then we let them stay home. Otherwise, they went to school. Well, we sent our daughter to school, and it turned out she had walking pneumonia. Well, we got that one wrong. And so we kind of adjusted how we looked at that going forward. And maybe there are other factors that we need to evaluate. I mean, we were new parents at the time. And I think that's true for us as leaders. Is you just simply have to evaluate what you do and how you do it. Based on everything you've learned, how you typically react to things, but you need to take a look at them. It's like, obviously it didn't go the way it was supposed to. So maybe I need to make an adjustment. I think one of the other things that I think is important, um, you accomplish very little by yourself. So when credit is given, take a back seat. It's you as a leader didn't accomplish that alone. It was more likely through a lot of hard work from your staff, and that's where the accolades need to go. And you know, sometimes I think folks can be worried about whether or not it appears. It's like if I give everybody else the credit, then how is it going to hurt me when I want to advance? And I honestly believe that leadership will see that what you're doing, and that when you're providing the credit to your staff, they know the staff didn't accomplish it alone as well, just no different than you didn't accomplish it alone. And I think That was one of the things I always tried to tell my bureau directors was, make sure that your staff get the credit they deserve, because you always want to, surround yourself with good talent. And I think that's part of good leadership, is to being able to do that. And as you're looking to move up in an organization is going to look simply at what you did. They're going to look at what your team has accomplished over that period of time, um, and your ability to be able to bring people together for a specific mission and to move and to advance that mission is critical. And then I think that's one of the things that, it's just important to make sure you give that credit, because it's where it belongs.
I agree. And I think giving credit takes more skill than people might realize. Um, Especially if you have a diverse team. Some people want credit in a different way, right? I can remember back, I had one individual, I was going to nominate them for an award, an employee recognition award. And I went to them and I said, "Hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up. I'm nominating you for this award." And she said, "If you do, and I get it, I will quit." And I said, "What? Why?" And she said, "I hate public recognition. Just put a letter in my employee file, or, give me a certificate I can put on the wall. But whatever you do, don't make me go in front of people. Don't put my name out there in lights." And that was it was a wake up call kind of lesson, is the way I might like to get credit isn't necessarily the way other people want to get credit. But that said, she definitely wanted credit. She just wanted it in a different way. So I think what you're saying with this rule to lead by is critical and super important to keep people engaged, and to let them understand that you value them and that they really are making huge contributions.
And I think what you're saying, that's also, I think, another good point, is that you need to understand, not only do you take a back seat and give the credit where it's due, but you need to know how to give that credit.
Mhm.
And I think you're absolutely right. And because I've had those situations where employees have told me, it's like, I don't want to stand up there and have you give me a certificate and tell me, how wonderful a job I did. Um, just thank me. And that's enough. Um, and yet others, that's they do want that, right? They want that recognition. It helps them grow as an individual. And we always talk about that in training, is that you gotta know how your people want to be recognized, because they all do it a little bit differently. And um, that would be a difficult situation where it's like, wow, it's like, you did a great job, I want to recognize you, and you're going to quit.
Yeah.
That's a tough situation. So one of the other things that and this is, I guess, more of a simple rule, back when I first started working for the state of Iowa, and I was learning as a personnel officer from my mentor, and I would go around with her. One time we left this Department of Human Services um, agency that we were visiting, and talking to them about, each agency had their own personnel individual that handled those HR situations. And we were talking with them, and then we walked out of there, and I said, "Man, that was you really know your stuff. You know what you're doing. You know how to get the stuff across." And she said to me, "I'm going to share a secret with you." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Good human resources, it's about 10% rules and 90% common sense." And I think, and that always stuck with me. And I translated that into leadership, is that, the rules are really those, when you're growing up with your kids and you're teaching your kids how to bowl, and they got the bumpers in the lanes, so they don't go in the gutter. It's like, that's really what the rules are all about. It's like, those are the banks to the river. Those are the gutter guards, whatever you want to call it, that keep you. But everything that happens within the lane is like, that's the common sense part. That's where, you don't, you know, don't always have to look. I had an employee that used to, there had to be a rule. Everything he did it was like, he goes, "Well, what's the rule?" He would always want to know, "Well, what's the rule behind this?" And I said, and sometimes I said, "Here's the rule." And sometimes you have to interpret that rule. You and I said, that's where your common sense comes into play. It's like, somebody may tell you you're wrong, but that's okay. And I think that's, there's not always a rule. And even if there is a rule, that rule isn't going to give you the answer every time out. And so as a leader, it's critical that common sense, that you have good common sense skills, that you're willing to, that gets back to trusting your gut again, and sort of where all this sort of fits, I guess, together for me. But not an overly complicated one, but it's just one of those things that I always remembered, is that there's not always a rule that's going to help you make that decision. So,
And that's where your values come into play, right?
exactly. That's where all, that's sort of your values, your North Star, your integrity, trusting your gut, all of those things. It's just all, that's where it all kind of, it all fits together as you're kind of developing your leadership style and how you lead. One of the things I said at one of our senior staff meetings was, it's important that we extend to others the grace that we've been extended. People are going to make decisions. They're going to do things that that was a totally different situation that nobody had any familiarity with. I mean, we were definitely in uncharted territory. And it's like, so people are going to make mistakes. We have to allow that. I mean, we obviously want to minimize it, and we want to minimize the impact of the mistakes on our employees, but there are mistakes that are going to be made, and we have to extend grace. And I think that's true in life, right? I mean, we don't know why people make the decisions necessarily that they do. And, and I will say that this is one of the rules that I struggle with the most. I know it's important, but I also know it's very difficult to do. I often talk about it as I go to church on Sundays and we have that confession part. It feels to me like I'm confessing the same things every week. And often they were often centered around work and where I wasn't extending that grace to somebody. And it's like, it's just, to me, is an extremely important thing to do, but it is very, very, very difficult. And I to those who are able to do it, my hat is off to them, and I try very hard, but it is I think a rule that is difficult for a lot of us. It's just important for me as a leader to acknowledge that I don't always get it right.
And I think when the leader extends grace, in a weird way, you're giving permission, or you're encouraging your team to extend grace to each other, right? I think it's very definitely the potential for a huge ripple effect that could really help your organization be healthy and robust, even in chaotic or difficult and challenging times.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think that it really is that's the culture you want in your organization, right? I mean, that allows people to be human, to be able to make mistakes. And you want an organization where, obviously, you don't want to be making mistakes all the time, but you want an organization where it's okay to make those mistakes, because you know that your team's going to extend that grace to you. You didn't make that mistake intentionally. You did it trying to make things better, and that's really important. And again, when we all have those personal things going on in our lives, right? I mean, sometimes we make decisions, our head's not completely in the game, because we've got, we may have an employee that makes a bad decision, and they're going through family trauma. There's, maybe they're getting, I've had situations where leaders have been, going through divorce, and it's like, those are things that weigh on people, right? I mean, you can't expect that people are going to be 100%, and we want them there. I mean, obviously 100% of the time we want their head in the game, but sometimes there are things that get in the way, and we have to figure out how to help them through those things. So a couple of the rules is that, sometimes you need to know when to lead and when to get out of the way. We all have different skills. As a team, we all bring different skills to the table. We had a situation back then where we had this a training opportunity where you were blindfolded and you had to go up this hill and figure out how to get from point A to point B. We had an individual on our team that was in the National Guard, and we called him Rambo, because he just kind of had that persona about him. Wonderful guy. really wonderful guy. It, it's like that was a situation he was made to lead in, right? And the rest of us, not so much. But as always, as the leader, it's like sometimes it's really difficult to know when you need to just take a back seat, when you need to back up and let somebody else take the lead. And it may be one of your staff, right? I mean, oftentimes they have the right skill set to know, and that's part of understanding the skills, the strengths of your employees, and how people react in adverse situations. Is to who's the right person to put in charge of this situation and to move things forward. Before I left, we were developing a employee welfare program to deal with employee trauma and things like that, and it was really struggling. And I had one employee who was on our employee relations team, who she is just somebody that she had a tremendous understanding of what people were going through in the field because she dealt with them from an employee relations standpoint, and she knew how to get things going, how to get things done. She knew, she was extremely empathetic, and so I went to her and I said, I want you to take charge of this program and to move it forward. And she got it done. And I mean, we weren't, they were, it's still in development when I left, but she was able to do that. And we had a situation where we had an employee that was assaulted at one of our driver's license stations. And so we went out to that station, took her with, and she was able to do all the things. She was able to help that employee kind of just be there as somebody to talk to help work through the situation, understand, listen to her, do those things that we never had done before. But it was just, again, she was the right person to do that. And it was, so it's understanding, I guess. Yeah, sometimes there's a time to lead and there's a time to get out of the way. One of the things, I guess, the other couple of thoughts are just the final thoughts are, it's like, have fun at work. We always tried to have fun. We always try to do things that, whether it was going out to lunch as a team or celebrating things. You spend so much time at work that if you don't, then you're going to have a miserable career. And I had a organizational psychology professor in college and I never, this is one of those things, it's like, things that you always pick up and don't want to let go of. He said in one of our classes, he says, if you're getting up in the morning, and he said, I would say 50% of the time, and you are not feeling good about going into work, then it's time to find a new line of work. It's important. And I always remembered that as and I sort of translated that into, if you're not enjoying yourself, you're not having fun at work majority of the time, then you really have to look at something else. Because not only is it not good for you, it's probably not good for your family. I mean, all of us take work home with us, and the challenges that we experience at work. And so it's just important that people have fun.
And there are always jobs in transportation.
Yes, absolutely. It's like there are plenty of
So
opportunities.
you're unhappy where you're at.
Yeah, you can always find another one. I think that is true. I guess lastly, I would say that the last thing that I like to tell folks is don't overcomplicate things. You can analyze a problem to death, but that's not always. It's like, to what end, right? I mean, I think knowing, it's like, this gets back to oftentimes as a leader, you got to trust your gut. And there aren't rules and there aren't policy. There's not anything that's going to help you. Just make a decision and move. I had an experience when we were first looking at implementing performance measurement. And I, as a division director, had developed a performance measurement guide or a list of performance measures that we as a division, we had implemented those, so we were following those, and we were going to do that as an agency. And the person in charge of developing that, over the course of 2 years, they developed a 26-page guide on performance measurement, but we didn't implement any performance measures. And it was really frustrating to the organization that, and sometimes you just gotta, get started and sort of build that plane in the air. And I think it's it's like you obviously don't want to get things wrong, but so you really just need to excuse me, you really need to just trust your gut and move forward, and then do a course correction if you need to.
Well, one of the things I really like about what you shared, Lee, is that in a way, if you look at the 15 points that you're recommending, these rules to lead by, you could take each of those and look at yourself and say, okay, as a leader, here's where I want, just what you're saying before, here's the door I want to walk through next. So here's the skill that I need to build, or here's the knowledge that I need to gain. And I really appreciate that what you offered today in the conversation is not just insight into what it takes to be an effective leader. You've also given us a bit of a blueprint that we can use to set up those practical actions we can take to actually build those skills. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes people get lost just trying to figure out where do I even start, and what do I do? It just feels like there's so much to learn. So I really appreciate a conversation that focuses on integrity and conviction and humility, and as well as some of those things we hear a lot about, but maybe don't always practice, like giving credit or supporting others. And
Mhm.
how, what does that look like in a daily world? And most important, having fun. It's okay to have fun and still be working on important things.
And it's okay to be wrong. I really like that one too. Like, you can be wrong as a leader, as a person, and learn from your mistake. And it doesn't make you bad. It doesn't make you, anything less than human. That's
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
You're all
Yeah.
wrong sometimes. We
Yeah.
get it.
Yep. Absolutely. How do you learn from that? How do you grow from it? It's like, yeah, you obviously don't want to make mistakes all the time, but it's like, but it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be human, and it's okay. Um, and for me, a lot of this is just, yeah, it's foundational to what I think. There are things that um, they're foundational to what you do as a leader, and I think, um, and it's important to, again, like I said, obviously, if I had one to pick, it would be following that North Star and fighting that, and because um, there's something that drives every one of us.
Wonderful. Wow. Now my brain is just, I got all these different ideas sparking in my head going, oh, what about this? What about that? So this is my favorite kind of conversation is when it sparks ideas and activities that, I can apply in my world and hopefully make it a little better place.
Mhm.
So thank you very much for sharing all that.
Thank you.
They want me to take time for the coin toss. What do you think?
I think it is. So we have the coin. We have a head and a tail on our coin. This is actually an aviation coin. But we wanted to have a real coin and not just pretend. So we'll flip it. It'll land on the ground, and then I'll let you know if it came up heads or tails. And it is tails. So
All
our
right.
tails question is, what was your first big ambition?
Oh, wow. Uh, yeah, that's a long time ago. Um, I guess my first big ambition was when I graduated from college, and I graduated with a degree in public personnel administration. That was back in the day when human resources, it was still personnel. But I wasn't able, and I really wanted to go to human resources and personnel. That was my thing. And I ended up going to work for the Department of Revenue and Finance, as a management analyst, um, which was not. I mean, I was dealing with tax forms and tax systems, and I had a wonderful time. I mean, it was a great group of we had at that time a very great group of young employees, and we had a softball team, and we played flag football, and we did a lot of those things. And so it was but it was not where I wanted to be. Um, I wanted to be in human resources, and so that was, yeah, my first great. And then the state restructured and took over the Department of Transportation's personnel functions, and so I had an opportunity then to go to work in HR. But I was in one of the other, I guess, I don't know if this is necessarily part of what you're asking, but when I first interviewed with the Department of Revenue and Finance, I was interviewing with the division director, and he asked me, he goes, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" I said, "Sitting across the table doing what you're doing." And he was taken aback by my answer. And when he hired me and he brought me in on that first day, he says, "You know, one of the things that really got sold me on you was the answer to that question." And so, I mean, it was so always having that. I mean, I always throughout my career was always looking to be where's my next step, and that's just I just think that's important. Is it gets back to that knowing what door you're going to go through. And so
Okay, so for 1 week a year, Iowa's roads basically become a bike purge because of RAGBRAI, right? From the DOT sides, we'll talk a little bit about it, but I'm going to play this video.
7 days, hundreds of miles, a journey across Iowa that becomes more than a ride. Every town opens its doors. Every main street turns into a stage. Every participant becomes a part of the story. Here, food is not just food. It's the taste riders remember and the reason they return. Here, music is not just music. It is the heartbeat of community and celebration. RAGBRAI is an event that transforms strangers into friends and moments into memories. You help create the moments that turn a ride into a tradition, a route into a community. This is not about miles, it's about impact. It is about being part of something unforgettable. RAGBRAI. Join the journey.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating when I was looking up things in Iowa, and I would love to hear about you from the DOT side, anything that you want to share with us about RAGBRAI or what your thoughts are.
yeah, it's incredibly. A lot of people don't think about how incredibly complex it is and how much time. It's never something. It never fell within my wheelhouse to work on, but I always, being a part of senior leadership, I was exposed to a lot of that. And the amount of time that we as a transportation agency spend with RAGBRAI itself and with the Department of Public Safety in talking about going over the routes and that they want to use, and what's here's the construction, knowing what construction is going on in that area, which impacts their routes and the state and the condition of those roads that they're going to cross, and things that are going on. And they literally spend probably from the time shortly after the time that RAGBRAI is over, they're then meeting again to talk about what goes on for the next year, and as RAGBRAI starts their planning process. And it's just incredible to see. I mean, it's just like a floating city, right? I mean, they go from overnight stop to overnight stop, and then there's, but the parts in between that people don't see are like, I live in a small town where we weren't an overnight, but we were a lunch destination, right? And this place where you had activities. And I mean, from the time they get up in the morning and the time they land at wherever their destination city is, there are things going on, and in addition to just the bike ride itself. And so all of those activities, it's pretty incredible to see, and the just thousands of people that are involved in the whole process. Because then they're obviously working with RAGBRAI. It's not just the bicycle riders; it's all the shag wagons and all those things um, that are a part of the process. But it is a pretty incredible, complex thing to see and get pulled off. And I had, when it came through State Center, well, at that time I was on City Council, and one of my jobs was to take pictures. We were in State Center. We are geographically the center of the state, and so we had this big pole that had, if you remember, MASH is like, it tell you, it's like Tokyo is like how many thousands of miles away. People wanted their picture taken with that, and so my job was to take pictures, and so I got to talk to a lot of people, and one gentleman from New Zealand that came to Iowa because he heard about RAGBRAI, and he was here by himself. And he just came all the way to Iowa to be a part of RAGBRAI. So it's for a state like Iowa, it's it's a week where we're in the limelight, and it's a pretty incredible, complex thing to see get pulled off every year.
I'm sure it's a boost to the local economies of those small towns too, especially when, people are stopping for lunch or whatever.
Oh, it is, and there are things that and there are a lot of benefits to it. The church that I belong to, as a matter of fact, I have a meeting tonight because Marshalltown, which is where I go to church, is an overnight stop. It's an opportunity for us to serve a meal to those folks, and then also benefit one of the missions that we work with, right? I mean, and to be able to raise money for this, so there's so much good that comes out of, obviously there's the tremendous economic boon to the cities where they are, but it's like there are a lot of things within that city that they get a benefit from it as well, and different people that benefit from the generosity of all these people in RAGBRAI.
And what a great way to explore a state. I mean, how fun. To me, it helps showcase that transportation really does impact quality of life and the life that we experience. It's not just about making sure that supplies the freight gets delivered on time. There's a lot that goes into transportation, and there's a lot of aspects of our lives that transportation impacts and has a direct impact on. Well, Lee, our time is coming to an end. It has been so much fun to spend some time with you, to hear your insights and ideas around leadership, and give us a little bit of an opportunity to understand a little more about Iowa and how the DOT there is continuing to pave the way and do innovative things. That's exciting to hear. We always like to remind folks that if they have ideas or questions, or people that they would like to interview, or transportation in the wild topics that they'd like to have highlighted, on our website we have forms. People can fill them out and get in the queue and share their ideas for future episodes. So encourage folks to take a look at the website as well as listen to the podcast. And Lee, can't wait till the next time we find something to work on together. And
You bet.
On the RAGBRAI. I'm going to be calling you.
Yeah. Well, Tricia, was nice to meet you, and Amanda, it's always good. We worked together a lot over the years, and so it's always good to be able to visit with you. And I'm just amazed at what you have done in the areas that you touch so many lives in transportation. And so thank you for that, and thank you for letting me be a part of that.
Thank you. Absolutely. Well, I still say I learned a lot from Lee. You were one of my mentors, so we're just paying it forward.
There you go. It worked both ways.
That's awesome. That's awesome.